Welcome to another episode of the Optimistic Met Fan Podcast. I am your host, Frank Arzberger, and I'm coming to you now a couple of weeks removed from what a lot of people have been saying is one of the most disappointing seasons in Mets history. So, as we know, the Mets lost that final game against Miami and didn't score a single run. Very disappointing, very disheartening. And, it was a lot to take in. You had Mendoza. He, has been going through it. A lot of people want him fired. You have David Stearns getting blamed for a lot of the lack of offense, lack of pitching at the end of the year that did not help the Mets' case to make the playoffs. Everybody online's been getting on Steve Cohen for the apology for the lack of play and basically what happened throughout the year. Said that he apologized to the fans, that we deserve better. And I think, a lot of that was deserved. I think a lot of the hate, a lot of the anger, myself included. You can't go into a year getting Juan Soto and then missing out on the playoffs. And as disheartening as that was, we saw the writing on the wall. It was either Mendoza was going to get fired after 2 years, or there was going to be major changes to not only the staff, but to the team as well. So, with that said, we do know that the Mets have cut ties with a lot of different coaches. So Jeremy Hefner is no longer the pitching coach. Eric Chavez, along with Jeremy Barnes, are no longer the hitting coaches. And there was a couple other coaches that either resigned or stepped down. John Gibbons is no longer the bench coach. So there's been a lot of different moves throughout the last 2 weeks. The Mets did come up with a new bench coach. They recently hired Kai Correa. And that's an interesting move. He's an analytics guy, obviously. I'm not a big analytics guy myself. I was kind of hoping for either a former manager or a former player to take that bench coaching role. But I kind of know what David Stearns was looking for. He still believes in Carlos Mendoza. I don't think he wanted to hire a guy that, was going to be breathing down his neck. And that's actually pretty good. So, with that, we can look into that. I don't know a lot about Kai Correa. He is a well-known guy in the Major League community. A lot of teams like him. A lot of people have said a lot of positive things about him, that he's a smart baseball guy. So it'll be interesting to see how he works with Carlos Mendoza. Jeff Albert, as everybody knows, is the new Major League hitting director, instructor, whatever you want to call it. I don't know why they just can't call it a hitting coach. Kind of annoys me that they get these different titles and they make up different titles in Major League Baseball. That's mainly because you can't really go from one team to the next and make a lateral move. So teams just come up with different titles just to kind of get around that. But we'll see what he brings. Was the director from the minor league system. So that's kind of intriguing to me with Albert, as the Mets' younger players that went down to AAA always seem to hit. And not only hit for average, but hit for power. High OPSs, all that. High on base percentages, the whole works. And I guess the idea is, and what I like, is that at least it's kind of like, okay, we're going to bring up the guy that's been helping all these young guys. Which kind of brings up a different question, or at least kind of silver lining of the offseason. Is this going to be an offseason where none of these young guys get traded because they're going to stick to their guns, the Mets, and keep developing all these young guys? I kind of like it, but I don't, because this team needs a change. Obviously, through the depth of this team, besides the top four guys, you saw the offense really lack this season, including Mark Vientos. Brett Beatty was up and down, got hot at the end, had a great second half, Brett Beatty, but we need a lot more from the supporting cast. So we'll see. That'll be interesting to see what the Mets do in the offseason. Right now, obviously, they can't do nothing because the offseason hasn't started yet. We're still in the playoffs. National League Championship and American League Championship series are going on right now. Congratulations to those four teams for making it. Wish the Mets would have made it, but the Mets have a lot of work to do. They were definitely not deserving of even getting to the playoffs, and that's a tough spill. That's a tough pill to swallow. Especially for me. I came on here all year optimistic, tried to keep that positive outlook. Maybe had that hangover feeling of last season, like this will work out. This team will somehow put it together at the end and go on one of those crazy runs at the end, and it didn't happen. So, I'm a man of my word. I decided to come on here and admit that I was wrong if the Mets didn't make it. And so I got to take the L on that one. And it is what it is. I think this team still has a lot to offer. Still think they have a lot of superstars on this team, a lot of great young talent that's coming up through the system. Very happy to know that the Mets have a great farm system to pull from. That's something that we haven't had. So I think Met fans should at least be excited about that. I don't think this is the same old LOL Mets that everybody keeps saying it is, because it's not like we have to just go into next season with the same team. We have a ton of options. We could, it's interesting. Do we re-sign Pete and then trade maybe Vientos? Do we trade Beatty? Do we trade Acuna? Do we trade a bunch of these guys in a package for somebody? Do we trade Brandon Sproat or Jonah Tom? Obviously, Nolan McLean ain't going anywhere, so I wouldn't put him in any trade talks. But, that's going to be something that we can talk about in later episodes. Maybe get some nice dialogue. Been thinking about doing some live episodes to talk to my whole community on not only YouTube but TikTok. And I want to thank a lot of the people that have been following my page recently, getting some really nice feedback on TikTok. Really proud of that. I know it's a small following, but recently got over 200 followers. So I want to thank a lot of my new followers and all the followers from the very beginning. It was a really fun year to get to know a lot of you guys. And hopefully we could continue in the offseason. I think it'll be fun. With that said, though, so the offseason, what do I think the Mets are going to do? Obviously, you got to re-sign Pete Alonso. But interesting enough, he did come out right away and opt out. And I know a lot of people, some people didn't like that. I was okay with it. I thought that, that's just Pete being Pete. He's being honest. But, and, just had to take a deep breath there real quick because I wanted to get this thought out. I don't think he's getting that 7-year contract that he recently came out and said that he wanted. Obviously, he wants to be a Met long term, wants to finish his career as a Met, feels like he has around 7 years left in him, maybe a little bit more. But, I think Pete's really betting on himself again. I think that that's not a bad thing. I love the hell out of Pete. I respect the hell out of Pete. But, Pete, probably, if I was the Mets, Pete, you're probably going to get a 5-year deal. I don't, unless somebody breaks the bank for you and says you're worth 7 years, I don't really see the Mets just jumping in and giving you 7 years. I think that'd be a little foolish, a little crazy. That's one thing about this regime that I like. They don't jump the gun and overpay for anything. So Met fans should be happy about that. That at least You got smart executives, and I know people aren't crazy about David Stearns right now because of what happened this past season. A lot of his moves didn't work. Didn't mean they weren't good moves. They just didn't work. Guys just didn't perform to their level, and he has to eat that. So yes, it was a bad season for him, but again, I think that Pete probably going to test the market, and I do worry a little bit that Pete might not come back, only if a team jumps out, like I said, and gives him 7 years. I don't see the Mets going that high, but if a team maybe gives him 5-year contract, he comes back to the Mets, I could see them maybe jumping to 6 and saying, all right, Pete, you know what, 30 million a year for 6 years, maybe 30 million for 5, take it or leave it. This year, especially because of what happened, we can't wait around for Pete Alonso. And it's really tough for me to admit that, really tough for me to just say, hey, you know what, this team hasn't won. And there is a possibility that in 2026, we might not be seeing a lot of the people that we know and love and have rooted for the past 4 or 5 years. During his press conference, David Stearns mentioned something, and this was something I was thinking about before this recording, this episode. Run differential was a big problem this year for the Mets. The runs against us were really high. Our defense was not good across the whole board. I'm not just trying to pick on one guy like Pete, who gets a lot of slack at first base, but Brett Beatty was doing his best playing third. I thought he played his best at third, but then had to convert to second base a little bit, did his best. Is a serviceable second baseman, but I think that hurt him a little bit. Jeff McNeil, extreme down year for him. Very disappointing. Lindor was surprisingly enough, probably this is his worst defensive year as a Met, and that was shocking. The only bright spot in the infield, I think, defensively was Luis Torrens. Alvarez took a step back. Nemo was a liability in left. We really got to figure that out. Not only was he slow in left field, but he had no arm at all. Teams were grabbing extra bases left and right on him, stretching singles, doubles to triples. And that hurts. That adds up. That's a big thing. Center field was an issue, even though Tyrone Taylor was really good when he was in there. We need an everyday center fielder. That has to change. Soto, I'm not going to kill him because you know what you're going to get when you have Soto. He was better than I thought in right field, but again, anything over his head, he's not going to catch. So the Mets really have to look hard this offseason at being a better defensive team. And that means that there might be changes that some of us might not be happy with. That leads me back to Pete. If we re-sign him, which I think we will, he's going to have to accept a role as a part-time DH, playing more games at DH. I can see a 100-game, 62-game split of DH and first base, And that means we're going to have to either find a first baseman or bring one up. I was very high in previous episodes, like I told you guys, of Ryan Clifford. That's an option at some point. I don't want to rush any of those guys down there in AAA. They've all collectively had, between Clifford, Benj, and Jet Williams, 34 games each at AAA at the end of the year. So I can't see any of those guys breaking camp right away. I think that would be a misstep unless one of them, has an unbelievable spring training. And then you want to bring up Ryan Clifford to play first and to help out Pete. And then you can switch between the two of those guys at DH when the other guy doesn't play. If Pete resigns as DH, then you also got to think of the possibility of maybe that means that's the end of Mark Vientos as a Met because he can't play the field. I don't want him picking up a glove ever again. So a lot of different things. It's going to have a butterfly effect, a domino effect. even of one move is going to dictate other stuff on this team happening. And that's a very exciting, very scary thing, because let's say the Mets want to upgrade at third base and want to move maybe Bader to second and trade McNeil. What does that mean for Pete? Is he going to resign as a DH still? Is he not going to come back? A lot of different moves that I think would be interesting. Do we try to move that bad contract that we have with Brandon Nimmo, which, a lot of Met fans kept saying, oh, I don't want Pete going past 35, 36 on this team. If we sign him long term, he's going to be here till he's 37. Well, that Brandon Nimmo contract is terrible because he's already 33 years old and going into his mid-30s, and he still has 4 or 5 more years on that contract. So that's a bad contract. He cannot play left field for that much longer. I don't even want him in left field next season, to be honest. So that's going to be a tough thing. Do we move, Nemo to a part-time DH role with Pete? Do we, there's a lot of different things that, I think this Met front office is going to have to think about really long and hard, because you make one move, and that first move with the position players, what you decide is going to determine other people's fates. Because if you're serious about being a better defensive team, there's a world where some of these guys might not be here. And, that's a very sad thing to take in. If you're like me and you watch these players come up through the system, and then you go to Citi Field and you root for them, you buy their jerseys, you buy, the shirts, the hats, all that stuff. And then to see some of these guys maybe not be here, but it's for the greater good. So, even though it's sad, it's kind of a realism. It's kind of realistic. This is something that we're all going to have to take a look at, accept it and just learn from it. I think the offseason could be exciting. Very looking forward to it. But, we need to get a new coaching staff first, and that's what these last couple of weeks have been. Getting the coaching staff revamped, and hopefully we get more news on some more names for the coaching staff. We still don't have a pitching coach yet, and even that, re-upping with the pitching, we got to get back Diaz for the bullpen. That's going to be tough, because I'm thinking he's going to want to raise. He's going to probably opt out. And then other than him, we really don't have anybody, unless you think some of these guys are going to come back. I do believe Minter might come back for that second year of his contract. I want Brooks Raley back. So we do have some pieces that we could, have a nice little foundation at the back end of the rotation, bullpen, rather. And then there's the rotation. There's different things with the rotation that I think was fixed at the end of the year. And I want fans not to roll their eyes when they hear that. But this was a team that, at the end of the year, brought up all those young guys. McLean, Sproat, Jonathan even. Jonathan was the one who struggled a little bit. But the other two guys at the helm of the young guys coming up, McLean and Sproat, very impressive, especially McLean. We look like we might have a new ace on our hands, hopefully. But yeah, a little bit too late to at least save the season. But at the same time, I think if you look at next year's rotation, it doesn't look terrible. I still think it needs a little bit of work. But, having McLean, Sproat, Tong, Peterson, Holmes, Manaea, is pretty good. And then you still have that wild card with Senga. Honestly, I don't think Senga's coming back. I think David Stearns might try to move him as well. So we'll see. There's a lot of different moves. Unfortunately, I didn't get to do any playoff episodes for the Mets, so that's kind of a bummer. But the offseason is going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be really interesting to see where the Mets go. And, you know, first things first, let's re-sign Pete. Pete, please don't wait 9 years to sign like you did last year. Okay. Um, I'm not saying take a home discount, but at least think about coming back for a reasonable price. I don't really like that Scott Boras is his agent. That's going to be a problem, but we'll tackle that. And yeah, so other than that, I think next week's episode will probably dive into some trade options that I think the Mets have, and we'll go from there. This was a short episode, I know. Wanted to do more. I actually just wanted to get back into the rhythm of it. Was out a couple of weeks. Just a very disappointing season for a lot of us Met fans. But again, I do appreciate everybody that followed me throughout the year. A lot of my new followers, thank you again. Recently, who checked out my page on TikTok, very appreciative of that. Might do some live episodes in a couple of weeks. Gonna try to get that going. Figure out what days I'm gonna do that. I'll probably post that on the page. So stay tuned for that. But like always, stay amazing. Have a great week, and I'll see you guys next time. All right. Bye.